Welcome back to the Bad Marketing Mums. Today's episode is something a little bit different from our usually scheduled content, and this one is for the ladies. No, actually, it is. Look, for our dads who are listening in as well, you still may find some benefits, so do stick around. But today we're going to be talking about something that we've discussed at length off air, and we think a few of our followers may be wondering about as well. And that is, how do your hormones play a part in your productivity? As an entrepreneur, you know that growing a business goes beyond creating funnels, building a brand, or running ads. It's also about consistently showing up to your desk with energy and a clear mind and focused thinking. Unfortunately, many entrepreneurs often overlook their health and mental clarity while pursuing business growth. And as a woman, our cycles can put your productivity through the ringer. What you may not realize is that your health and brain are your greatest assets and can deliver the best ROI for your business. And this is where our guest today, Tanessa Shears, comes in. She helps business owners take their brains from operating at 50% to reaching a peak performance capacity of 90+%. Tanessa is a kinesiologist, certified sleep science coach, and health consultant who helps entrepreneurs double their energy and focus. She works closely with business owners to eliminate brain fog and wake up well rested so they can get more done in less time, maintain consistent, stable energy throughout the day, and feel better than they have in years. Tanessa is also the host of the Becoming Limitless podcast, sharing her experience on optimizing health and focus for business success. Welcome, Tanessa. It is so lovely to finally meet you. This podcast has been in the making for a few months now, so I cannot wait to dive in.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So Tanessa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a mom. I've got a 1 and a 3-year-old. So we're all set in similar stages with the littles right now. So I definitely hear you on sometimes having to wake up in the night with sleep and all of those kind of things. But my business originally started in 2014. I started as a personal trainer, and within about 15 months, I was training 33 client hours per week. Now you add that to marketing and back end, and I was feeling, oh my gosh, this is a lot. I can't imagine what it's going to be like when I have kids. How am I ever even going to see them if my business keeps up like this? So I remember I had heard of an online marketer and I was like, oh, I'm curious about what this is. And that's when my business started moving online in about 2017. And slowly it's been transitioning that way. But over the years, I, looked at my client base and they were entrepreneurs. And I was like, this is interesting. What is going on here? So I asked a couple of them and they're like, you know what? We came here to look better in our jeans. But to be honest, I said, like, I'm sleeping better. I'm more focused. I get more done during the day. I'm less stressed out. And this is like, it was impacting their businesses. Like they weren't feeling like they had to work till 11 o'clock at night. They weren't feeling like they were missing out on time with their families because they couldn't feel present because they were so exhausted. And so all of this kind of snowballed. And I was like, this is amazing. I'm an entrepreneur. I know entrepreneurs and I know how I can use these strategies to help them not only in their business, but feel better as parents and in their personal lives. So it kind of snowballed into this beautiful consultant business where I help entrepreneurs double their energy and their focus.
Yeah, it's such an interesting topic. Would love you to briefly explain for ourselves and our listeners the idea behind scheduling your work according to your cycle and why this is actually important, why we should be thinking about this.
I think most people aren't tuned in to something that happens so often in their own bodies. Now, before I kind of got into this, like I was never even tracking my cycle. Like I track my cycle now with a ring I'm wearing called an Aura ring. And it tracks it not only with like guessing when your cycle should start and should end, but what your temperature is. And it's fantastic. When you start tracking these things, you start noticing patterns in your energy when your temperature is up for half the month and down for half the month. And then when you start putting this together with like, well, how does my brain function? We have to start looking at the difference between how we think our hormones work and how they actually work. So I'll give you a contrast. Men have a 24-hour hormone cycle. That means they get testosterone that rises and falls at the same time approximately every day. And so they repeat Groundhog Day every day, their hormones. But ours span over, 26, 28, 30, 32 days. So naturally, if you look at the 24-hour cycle that men go through, they go through a time when they're super productive, and then they're super social, and then they go through a time where they want to kick back and have after work drinks. And this whole cycle plays out for us over a month. There's times that we're more productive. There's times that we're more social. There's times where we're wrapping up projects. And so when I started to kind of be like, oh, well, that makes sense. That means my productivity has to change during the month. And so this is when I really started to tune into my energy. And now it's to the point where I know when my cycle starts, and I actually block out 7 days on my calendar, approximately a week, where I keep it light, like for meetings, like for interviews, like for client calls, because I know there's a good chance that I'm going to feel like I just want to have some downtime. And so by knowing when your energy is high, when your productivity is high, when you're going to get better sleep, when you're going to get worse sleep, if you're intuitive with that, you can start to look at when should I start my projects? When should I do my interviews? When should I wrap it up? So this is kind of a really cool way to just lean into your body's natural energy shifts throughout the month to help your productivity instead of fighting with yourself, thinking it should look the same every day.
That makes sense. And again, the good old patriarchy, hey, because obviously the way that we have grown up thinking that we should be working and being productive, I'm guessing is 100% aligned with men's natural cycle, right?
I mean, add on top of that, pregnancy hormones and postpartum. I think I read somewhere that your postpartum hormones don't really normalize. Like, it can take years for them to actually normalize to a level like pre-pregnancy. So like you add that on top, and it's just like so many things to consider. When you implemented scheduling around your cycle, what was your initial reaction like once you created that schedule and saw it in effect?
I thought it was just so neat because everything felt like there was a lot less fight and a lot less resistance, right? Like you can even, when you just start looking at like, oh, well, this is why I feel so social. It totally makes sense why I'm in my Instagram DMs, making new connections, reaching out to people. And then there's certain times where I'm just like, I don't want to talk to anybody right now. So it's kind of nice to know, like, if this is, the week that I'm going to want to be social, maybe I should really lean into that instead of, doing my bookkeeping this week, because that might be better for another time. So the reaction was just really like, hey, I can make better use of my time. And it also took so much of the pressure off of thinking that I had to be productive every day. Like so many of my clients I work with, they're just like, I didn't get everything done today and my list was so long. And I'll even have clients that will do their workouts and they're like, I felt so weak this week. I was like, are you in the last 7 days of your cycle right now? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. I think the best thing I took away from it is the compassion that I have for myself and how I'm just able to be like, well, of course I'm feeling tired more than usual. Of course I don't feel as productive. Or of course I feel like a social ninja right now. Look what my body's doing. And I think it really allowed me to have compassion instead of beating myself up for not getting through the to-do list every day.
Can you break it down for us, Tanessa? What do the different cycles or phases, I should say, of your cycle actually mean in terms of productivity? Like, are we better at planning in one stage? Are we better at big picture thinking, getting stuff done? Like, take us through it. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So day 1 will mark the first day of your period. So we'll start there. And that's what's called your menstrual phase. And in general, all your hormones are low. So your energy is low. You probably don't feel like doing many intense workouts. You probably don't feel very social. So I kind of just like to use that as just like, I am going to schedule time in the afternoon to read instead of plow through more stuff. Like that's kind of how I think about it, is like, I want to have optional nap time. I don't always take it, but knowing it's there and having that pressure taken off of myself is wonderful. So during those days, like obviously I still work, but I'm also very aware of not making sure I pack my schedule the same way. So that's the menstrual phase. Usually lasts between 5 and 7 days for most people. Then we go into what's called the follicular phase. And so as this happens, estrogen starts ramping up. And if you think estrogen starts with an E Energy starts with an E. So your energy begins going up. You probably feel like those are those days you're like, yes, workout. Like, you know, you get off the bike or you get out of the gym and you're just like, that was a good workout. This is that time of the month. And we're talking like end of period to about day 13, 14. This is the time where you are like super productive, start new projects. You're going to go reach out to new clients. This is kind of when you're like, well, let's set the stage. What projects can we open in this stage? From there, we move into what's called the ovulatory phase, and that's right around ovulation. And usually, I mean, everyone's is a little bit different, but on average, about day 14 to 17, this is when you shine socially. So if you are going to be doing a masterclass in your business, you put it in that window. If you are going to be doing an interview and you want to schedule it, that's the time to do it. Or if you know that you have to record videos for your program, that's the time to do it. You know, when it just feels like when you're recording something and then the words just roll out and it's just really easy and it's fluid, that
Not
is the
this
best
podcast recording.
Yeah, so that's the kind of contrast. You know, when you're on your game, you get on a live and you're just flowing and it just feels good, and the words just come through you. That is social time. And then after that, so after you go through the ovulatory phase, you go into your luteal phase, and that's about day 17, 18, all the way through until you get your period again. And this is a phase where your hormones are starting to drop. Specifically, estrogen drops first, progesterone drops later. And what we're looking at is closing projects, organizing, administration tasks. Maybe you're doing a little design in Canva. Maybe that's the time you want to do that. So think of more of that, like organizing, closing things down. That's what we really look for there. And then naturally that leads you back into your cycle again. So I want you to think of it as like energy from the day one of your cycle goes up and it's at its highest in that ovulatory phase. And then it comes down on the other end. So I kind of like to schedule my business like that as well. So it has those ebbs and those flows. Did it feel like I covered that pretty good?
Yes. Oh my God. That is so interesting. And I have a masterclass on Monday, so now I'm going to have to go look at the calendar and see whether I'm going to be on my A game or not. Hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of hacks that you can build into there as well. I mean, your cycle is so integral with your sleep. And so there are so many things that, like, when we're conscious now of, like, let's say you do have a masterclass planned for the late luteal phase and you're like, oh my gosh, that's when I'm normally a little less energetic. Then you start looking into like, okay, if I need more nurturing, how can I make sure that I'm not driving myself into the ground so that I have the energy, because I have to do it at that time anyways.
Yeah. The way you've described each cycle, it's almost as if from day dot of your period, you're preparing yourself for a brainstorming phase, then the creativity execution phase, and then the tying of the loose ends, and then debrief. It's like, that's the whole cycle of making like marketing campaigns or any sort of marketing strategies. It's like, well, if you want to do that and you want to create your marketing strategy, look to your hormones.
There's nothing worse than launching during the luteal phase. I have tried it and I'm like, you know, those launches you've had early in your business where you just kind of like quiet quit in those last couple days when you're just like, I'm over this. So that is likely a luteal phase. No, we launched during the follicular phase. So we launched from day 7 to 15.
There you go. And I'm thinking, right, you've got that 3-day window when you're feeling really energetic and social. That's when you're going to batch film all of your reels or your TikTok videos as well, right?
So like we've spoken about the phases of the cycle, but what about for women who don't have a cycle?
Yeah.
Does it apply to them as well?
It does, but in a different way. So this is kind of the bit of the journey that I have been on over the last couple of years. So keep in mind, I've had 2 babies in the last 4 years. So hormones have been a little bit different, but just naturally the processes of coming off the birth control and then having the baby, then dealing with that, then going on the birth control and then off the birth control. And so seeing all of that, one of the things that I learned when I started digging into this is that when you're on a hormonal based birth control, you actually don't get a period. You get a withdrawal bleed from removing the estrogen-based birth control. So having said that, if you think of your hormones in their natural unadulterated state, so to speak, as like this natural ebb and flow, kind of this wave that we talked about, when you're on a hormonal-based birth control, what it does is it flattens that line. So it kind of decreases your ability to lean into the good, but it also decreases the bad a bit. So that's kind of one of the things that I've even noticed myself is like, the end of the cycle, I do notice a little more restless sleep and a little more overheating at night, but my highs on the other side, my energy is a lot better too. So mind you, having said that, some people still choose to use the birth control. So one of the things that I have done with my clients is like specifically on the Aura Ring for my clients that actually don't get a cycle at all. Let's say they have an IUD or something like that, or their cycles are not as regular. The Aura Ring will actually track your body temperature, and you can tell where you are in your cycle by your temperature. So if you've ever used any of those or even heard of those birth controls like natural cycles and things like that, where it's based on your body temperature, it's so interesting. From the start of your period, you get a gradual decrease in average body temperature all the way up until ovulation, and then everything is above baseline temperature all the way to your period. So you get this beautiful like sine wave of like lower temperatures, higher temperatures. So you can use that to pinpoint where you are in your cycle if you're not bleeding, because that's the way you can obviously tell where day one is. But that's something that you can do. You can still lean into that, but it's definitely a more, I would say, exaggerated effect when you're not having a birth control that's altering the hormone levels.
What about with women, say, like that are going through, say, menopause or going, or I think, what is it, perimenopause?
Perimenopause.
Yeah. So what about those women that end up not having a cycle, where their cycles are diminishing? Is that kind of the same thing, or is it like everything is all over the shop that they can't actually measure?
I think that's what comes with the struggle of perimenopause, is that I've had a couple clients going through it. Some of them have now like 20-day cycles, and some of them have way longer cycles, and then they alternate in between. So it's harder to keep track of that because your hormones aren't as regular. But the interesting thing is, after you pass through into menopause, you get more of that, just like that 24-hour style of cycle that men have, because you don't have that natural rise in estrogen, drop in estrogen, rise in progesterone, drop in progesterone. So during that perimenopause time, it's one of those times where it's like, it's a little more unpredictable for sure, because if your cycle is 20 days this month, then technically your midpoint, which would have been the 14-day on a regular cycle, is now like day 10. So it's harder to kind of predict. But I imagine if you use something like a ring or a basal body temperature reader, you could probably see it. It just might be on a shorter time frame or a longer time frame as your cycles change.
Now, for anybody listening who's thinking, okay, maybe this is for me, maybe I want to give this a try, what would be the first step you would recommend that they take to align their work with their cycle?
Yeah, the first thing you can do is just start tracking it. It's a lot of us don't actually track it, considering it's something that it happens every month. And I think that's normal. We're just not taught to look into stuff like that. So maybe looking at, okay, well, what if I mark day one, and just what if I made a note of my energy on a scale of 1 to 10 throughout the month and just tracked it? You know, you can do it in a journal and a notepad. Like, what am I on day 2? What am I on day 3? If 10 is high energy and 1 is low, and kind of just notice. And I wouldn't take a 1-month cycle as like the be all end all. I might do it for 3 or 4 cycles and really start to see how you are with it, because there are definitely some people we know that experience very intense PMS, and some people are very tired during their period, and some people don't feel social at all, despite the fact that they quote unquote should feel more social during that time. So I always think it's leaning into really finding your energy. And for me, I found that I am most likely to get headaches in the 3 to 4 days before it starts. And so I have been on podcast interviews with a headache, and I won't do it anymore. So I just block those days out. And that's just something that now I know that works really well. So tracking would be number one. The second thing you could do is, if you're a learner and you're like a sponge, you just like to take stuff in, there are so many YouTube channels and stuff that talk about this. Specifically, the first look I got this book. This is actually the first book I got. It's called In the Flow. I don't know how to say her name, Elisa Vitti, I don't know, In the Flow. And this book here was the first time I ever even knew that cycle syncing was a thing. And so this book I found laid it out really clearly. It talked about how your exercise functions during different times of the month, how your food does, how your sleep does, and all of that kind of stuff. And it really just helps you put it together, because once you're aware of it and you start observing it, you're like, oh, that's cool. But you have to know what you're looking for, I think.
I will find that book and link it in the show notes for our listeners so they can go and check it out as well.
Do you happen to have any apps or tools, techniques that you recommend that to use to track, or do you rely on the good old calendar? 'Cause, I mean, you've mentioned the ring, but what if someone doesn't want to put their personal data on that wearable piece of tech? What other things would you recommend?
Yeah, so if you're not wanting to go the tech route, because I'm sure Apple Watches would have a feature in there. I know Fitbits have a feature in there. You could just use a journal. Like something like that would work. And if it's about a wearable specifically, I imagine there are specific apps that you can download that are just for that. I think I had one called My Calendar like 3 or 4 years ago, and you literally just hit start, stop, and then it goes the month. So if not that, then I would just write it down by hand and track it. That would be the way that would make sense to me, I think.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the ring? What's it called again?
Oura, Oura. Yeah, so it's a ring that I actually incorporate into my practice with my clients. And so one of the foundations of the way I work with clients is data driven, because I'm all about return on investment. I want to know that the habits we implement are worth our time. We are busy. We are moms. The last thing we have time to do is go on the internet, see 30 people recommending 60 health habits and thinking we should do them all. But I really think it's about what works for my body and what has the best result. And so I use this to establish return on investment of our time. And so this ring gives us data about everything from our resting heart rate at night, what time our resting heart rate drops during the night, which can give us a good indication of how well we're recovering. It looks at things like your body temperature and your breathing rate and your sleep duration and the quality of your sleep and your activity levels. Like, it gives so much data, but there's a really useful piece of data in there. It's called your heart rate variability. And to just simplify it, it's a measure of how much your body is under fight or flight. And so it's a really good tool for being able to guide my decisions with how intense my workout is, or if I do take that afternoon nap. Because if I'm seeing this score drop, that says to me, okay, my body's not recovering properly. I need to nurture it a little more. So in addition to where I am in my cycle and my temperature, I let this variable called heart rate variability guide a lot of my decisions when it comes to how hard I'm pushing that day.
I think I need that ring.
It's really cool.
It sounds really fun. Oh my goodness. Love it. What type of results have your clients been seeing after tracking this, after taking all of this data into account?
One of the big things I like to work on first is sleep. And I know the interesting thing is when we just think about working on our health, what do we think of? We think of getting an exercise plan and changing our diet, right? But the thing is, if our sleep is not optimized, think of how many times you've woken up tired and opted out of your workout because you were too tired. Or think about how many times it was harder to stay on track with your food because you had more cravings, or your hunger was increased, or your hormone called insulin was 20 to 40% less effective, which basically means when you eat food, it is stored. And your blood sugar goes up and it crashes, and you're having that afternoon energy crash. So I always like to start with the basic of sleep, because even sleep leads into our monthly hormones. Because if our cortisol is not in check, cortisol is a stress hormone, right? If our body is stressed out, it messes with the hormone progesterone. And when progesterone is affected by stress, that's when you get really bad PMS. You ever notice sometimes you get really bad cycles and you get headaches and you're sweatier than usual and you're moodier? All of a sudden you're like, I'm not ever like this. What is going on? Or you cry, or you go ragey. Like there's a couple cycles ago, I got really ragey. I was like, I feel like I'm pregnant again. Like, I haven't had hormones.
All the above.
Yeah. So those exaggerated PMS symptoms are likely caused by cortisol that is too high. And that comes because we're pushing the productivity, pushing the workouts, eating intermittent fasting, doing all these things that we think we could do every day the same because men do it that way because of their hormone cycles. But everything changes for us. And we wonder why we feel so groggy all the time. So sleep is one of the most nurturing, restorative ways to help your cortisol so that you can show up to your workouts, so that you can stay on track with your food, so that you can manage your brain. It's not a pillar of health. It's like the foundation on which everything else is built. Like, without sleep, everything else is twice as hard. So I always wonder, why do you want to make it so hard on yourself? Start with sleep.
Yeah, we had a guest.
That's like the easier than changing your diet and doing exercise.
It's free and you're doing it anyways. So why not make it better?
I mean, we had a guest, Dennis, who he had a really great metaphor for our brains. It's like, it is your most valuable, your most expensive computer, and it's between your ears. So what you're saying is you need to maintain that computer just as much as you maintain any other piece of machinery. However, this one needs just that constant maintenance, and you need to look after it. And
I
most
love
people
that
forget.
analogy. It's so
Yeah.
good. The way I like to talk about the brain that's very similar to that is like, I think that we have this high powered computer that kind of you were referencing there inside of our head. And it's literally like the most powerful thing, but the way we use it as if it's like on a shelf, for some time, like that's why I say like most of our brains, I think are at 50 to 60% of peak capacity. And like, what would happen to your business if you were at even 70 or 80? Like, what would that be like for your ability to write copy and make engaging Instagram posts and record valuable TikTok videos? And then not even outside of your business, like, how would you show up as a mom? Like, if your brain was working optimally and you had the ability to be aware of your thoughts and notice when you were getting impatient, or being able to just really be in tune with your kids' emotions and when they just need a hug versus when they're being like they feel frustrated. Like, I feel like our brain, if we could use it the way it was designed to be used, I feel like our potential is limitless, right? And that's why I built my whole brand around becoming limitless. It's not about being perfect. It's about seeking out the capacity. What are you capable of when your brain is on board?
Hmm. Can you share with us a success story of how one of your clients started tracking their cycles and what they saw happen?
Yeah. So I actually had a client, she just graduated from my program. And one of the first things that we did with her was had her tracking. So she was actually, it's a good example. She had an IUD, and so she did not have a regular cycle. So this is a good example. If you're like, but I don't get that, that couldn't be for me. One of the things we started doing was batching her work in with where she was in her cycle. So what she did was she does like luxury travel packages and stuff like that for different places all over the world. And so we were looking at like, okay, how do you get your business? And she liked to create all these brochures for different countries around the world. And she found that her creativity really started to peak right after ovulation. So we put all of that then, and that's something that helped with that specifically. And when we really started then optimizing her sleep, part two of that. And then the third part is looking at in the morning when she wakes up, what are the things she's doing to engage her brain so that she can still function on the days her brain is less productive. That's when I remember she sent me a specific message. She's like, I didn't know Mondays were supposed to feel like this. And it was those days where you're just waking up. And she was like, one of those people who's like, I have never woken up at 7 in my life. And she's like, I'm waking up at 7 all the time now, right? And it's just really looking at like, how are we cueing our brain? Like, we have our hormones, but then how are we cueing our brain for them to work with our hormones?
Amazing. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I saw you put up a post on your Instagram a few days ago about how you had done everything wrong for your, your nighttime routine and how that then impacted you the next day. And it seems like the things that you had listed, I was like, oh, well, I do those every night. Can you take us through that? I'm just going to go on a total tangent here, but it was so interesting because they seem like really minor things, but when they're all added together, they had a big impact.
Yeah, I love that. That has been one of my most viral carousel posts I've ever put up. I couldn't get over it. Basically, the post is called, I screwed up my wind down routine and messed up my sleep so you don't have to. Here's what happens. And the backstory to it is that my mom was having a Barbie party on Saturday night. And I took out the 1-year-old and the 3-year-old, and me, my husband was working. And so if you've ever kind of got, when you're out with kids and it's like, it's not relaxing because you're having to watch the kids the whole time. And like, I was driving, so I wasn't drinking. And then the other people are drinking. They're knocking my kids over because they're so small. I'm stressed out. I'm trying to feed them. It's like, get away from the licorice. Like, where is everybody? I was so stressed out that night that I by the time I got home, I literally just went into bed. And I went to sleep at the same time as I always do. But the only difference is that I skipped my wind down routine. And I'm very intentional with that. And here are the things I noticed right off the top of that is using my Aura ring, I was able to see and feel, feel the next day that during the night, my heart rate was 2 beats per minute higher than the average. I felt like I had stressy sleep. When you're stressing out and you're like, am I really sleeping? And I didn't feel like I woke up, I think 3 times during the night. And then at the end, it was like 4 o'clock and I couldn't get back to sleep after that. Those nights and you're just like, why? I needed to sleep tonight. And it was just thing after thing like that. I was tired. I felt like I had fog behind my eyes and I was so impatient. I was in a mood and a half yesterday. And I said to my husband, I was like, I need you to be the support today because I'm recovering from a sleep from heck. But basically, and that stat we were talking about, the heart rate variability, it showed that my body was under stress. And so the big things that I did, and I have them written out here, is the things that really impacted my wind down routine was I ate within 90 minutes of sleep, which is something that can really affect your sleep quality. I had high sugar, carb, processed food, which I mean, I was sitting by the cookie plate. That's my fault. I had bright lights. I was on my phone before bed, checking in with my husband. I didn't cool my bedroom down. I didn't have my warm shower. I didn't read before bed. I was out of the house till like 30 minutes right before, ran right into bed. And of course, on the way home, I listened to a business podcast because, you know, you want to rev your brain right back up and think business. So all of these things combined into the perfect storm. And I just literally, it was an awful sleep. It was one of those sleeps where you're just like, tomorrow's going to be awful. And then it's just a really good reminder too of like, don't do that very often.
Yeah. And you would have felt hungover even though you hadn't had anything to drink.
I think I had it worse off than some of the people that did drink. Because I'm very regular with my sleep routine. So when you're out of it, it's interesting. I've had clients share this experience, but when you get into a really good routine and your brain feels really energized and you have one of these days, you're just like, oh my gosh, I remember feeling like this and thinking it was normal. And I never questioned it. And so now it's just such a cool experience to just be able to have that perspective and be like, oh, I know the difference and I know exactly what to do to get there. And that's kind of one of the things that I like to share on my podcast and everything, is just like how easy things that we can do to make your brain feel better.
All right. Well, this podcast is all about the ladies, but what can dads learn about and benefit from their partner's cycle scheduling besides staying away when we're just ready to kill you over anything?
Too good. So actually, I just saw this recently on an Instagram post from Aura. There are certain, I guess, cycle apps that your partner can link their account and track your cycle as well. Although I honestly think that my husband wouldn't know what the heck to do with that information as well. But I thought that was an interesting option. There's obviously some men out there that find that interesting. But as far as like what, I think a lot of it starts with me doing my job at letting him know. So for example, the same way I let my business know that I will be less available for it for a couple of days during the month, I let my husband know, hey, you know, I'm going to be more tired. I'm going to need to make sure that I get a good sleep during the night. And I'm going to need you to step up a little bit more when the 3-year-old puts the Elsa dress on for the 30th day in the room. And it's just easier to let her wear it one more day than to have the fight about what we can't wear. Why maybe we want to wear something different. But it's those kind of days. It's just like informing them, like, I'm just going to need that little extra support today. Or, you know, can I go have dinner by myself tonight? Just little things. And I think it comes down to asking for it, because I think most of us just assume that people should know. But I think that's something that's helped me at least.
Oh, yes, I love that. And yeah, perhaps if they did have that app, they might schedule time away. Certain times.
With the kids, right?
Yeah, take the kids away. Just get out of the house and leave me alone. Oh my goodness. Oh, well, thank you, Tanessa. This has been really insightful. So where do you usually hang out online, Tanessa? Are you an Instagram girly or do you hang out on TikTok?
Yeah, I'm full-time on Instagram right now. I'm just like, minimize the focus. Instagram was where I'm at. Feel free to come over, ask some questions, a bunch of free resources over there. And I'm really responsive in my DMs if you send a message.
Awesome.
Thank you, Tanessa. Now, we usually do some quick fire questions. What's your number one tip for busy parents in business?
Prioritize your sleep. And I know that sometimes as parents, we like to say, but my kids are waking me up multiple times and I get there. I'm in that with you. But I think we can still optimize the sleep we are getting, even if it's fragmented and we're up a couple times a night. So I think just really leaning into what sleep can do for your stress levels. Because if we're feeling busy, we don't want to feel stressed too. So leaning into sleep as a tool.
Excellent. And yeah, we were talking about before we started recording today that Clem and I both had bad sleep last night. So this is a very timely episode, I think. Now, Tanessa, you have been a featured guest in, and we are now at 105 podcasts, which is amazing. I'm going to put you on the spot here and ask you, what podcast should we absolutely be tuning into as small business owners, as female entrepreneurs? What are your top recommendations for us?
Yeah, so I'll give you the 3 podcasts that I listen to the most, and they have different purposes to them. So if I'm looking at anything business related, strategy, quality of product, like really wanting to be like the best possible product I can make, the best marketing I can do. I'm a huge fan of The Game with Alex Hermosi. I think that is an exceptional podcast. He over delivers on everything. If I'm looking at managing my brain, because I think the biggest skill that you can have is the ability to focus and manage your thinking and direct it to what you need it to. And so for that, there's a podcast called the Life Coach School Podcast with Brooke Castillo. It is fantastic. And then the last one, it's a podcast I stumbled on not long ago. It's called Friday instead of Friday. And it's a couple that got tired of the hustle life and relocated to Italy and took their family with them, and how they're kind of learning to slow down and when is enough enough. And I always tune into that podcast when I just need to slow down and be reminded that be present. Kids are small. Don't waste this. And I think that's a good one for that. And of course, mine, I have to say, my podcast. But if you want the health stuff for entrepreneurs, Becoming Limitless.
Of course.
What made you get into kinesiology? Did I say that correctly? Kinesiology?
Yeah. It's a study of movement. I was a swimming instructor for the longest time while I was making my way through university. And it got so cold teaching like 12 hours of swimming lessons a week. This was before I became a personal trainer. I asked my supervisors, how can I get out of the water? And they're like, do you want to teach the seniors aquafit? And I was like, whatever it takes. And so as I was getting my certification to become an aqua fitness instructor, I was like, this is so cool, learning about muscles and how the body moves. And this is coming from a girl who skipped PE like at least the first 15 minutes when you had to sweat and run and stuff like that. That was me for my entire life. So I was very like anti-exercise prior to this, but it was so interesting that I like walked into the registrar office at university and switched from communications to kinesiology. And I was just like, I don't want to be a news anchor. I want to move. And so from there, like naturally after leaning into aquafit and group fit and personal training, like this whole lifestyle of fitness just kind of bloomed around me after getting turned on to that by accident.
Our final question for you today. It's a bit left of field given what we've been chatting about, but I saw this again, just been stalking your socials. You did a post, and I think this is fascinating, and that's why I thought it'd be fun to talk about it here. You did a post about using ChatGPT for meal planning. Can you take us through this? This is such a good idea because I don't know, I'm sure most of our listeners have probably only been thinking about it in terms of content creation. But yeah, tell us all about that because it's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, this was so fun. When I first got on ChatGPT, one of the first things I was doing was I was like, ooh, is this able to replace me? You know how we all get on there and I'm starting to ask all these questions and stuff like that. But I like to use it to meal plan. And there's a couple of ways that I did that. So let's say, and if you're not familiar and you're listening with ChatGPT, it's basically just online AI and you ask it questions, it gives you good answers. So I basically went on there and I was like, I have the weirdest ingredients in my fridge right now. I think there's like zucchini and mushroom and quinoa and some bunch of weird stuff. And so I put it into ChatGPT and I said, ChatGPT, make me a recipe with this stuff. And it popped out this delicious recipe. And I was like, okay, I can take this. And it worked really well. Second way I used it is if you have specific dietary requirements. So let's say, can you make me a breakfast recipe that has no flour in it and 25 grams of protein? And give me 5 options. And it'll pop it out because you know how often like I've worked with clients in the past and they're like, I hate eggs. And I was like, oh dear, I don't know that I have many more options than that. So this is really, I'm like, give me 5 recipes, no eggs, no flour, no sugar for a breakfast, and let's see what we come up with. And like the ideas are great. So that's the other one. And then last one, the prompt I put in was, I only want to cook 3 days a week. And the cooking time has to be less than 30 minutes. Now, meal plan for 7 days during the week, making sure I hit 100 grams of protein per day and only include, I said like flour on 2 days a week or something like, because that's the way we eat at our house. And it just spits out this 7-day meal plan. And it's like, you cook on this day, don't cook on this day. I was like, this is amazing. So it literally takes, I think our brains are here for bigger purposes than meal planning. So if I don't have to use my brain for meal planning, sign me up.
I think that can also go into our number one tip for busy parents as well, that one. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I love that. And there used to be a TV show where they did that. Like people would come around and just make, like, I think it was a professional chef would come to your house and make a meal with whatever random stuff you had in your fridge. So it's kind of like that. You have to do the cooking still.
Maybe ChatGPT 5.
I know, right? I can actually make it for you too. Oh my gosh, that is fascinating. I love that. Best hack ever.
You can do it with workouts too, by the way. So don't feel limited. Be like, oh, can you make me a workout to take to using 10-pound dumbbells? That's a full body workout. That's 30 minutes. You could literally anything you want, be as crafty as you want, and it'll pop it out. It's awesome.
I got curious the other day, and I mean, mind you, ChatGPT is only using information up to September 2021. But I got really curious and asked them, can you do a shopping list and break it down by the 3 major supermarkets that we have here in Australia? These are all of the ingredients I need. Can you tell me where I need to get each one based on cost? And it did. It broke it down by table, showing Woolies, get all these. Kohl's, get these. Aldi, get these. From our information, this is how much each one on average is costing across the country. Now, mind you, that's going to be very different now with the cost of living going up through the roof. But it helped me actually save time in my shop, because then I had an inkling as to where I needed to go to get the best price on each item. And it even then broke it down as well, like, don't get name brand for this. Get the Woolworths brand for this particular item.
Can you imagine when it connects to the internet and you can like match coupons to this?
It's terrifying. I am absolutely terrified as to what it will do when they flick the internet connection back on. Because they did have it on for like a month. And then they realized that ChatGPT 4 was bypassing paywalls. It was bypassing CAPTCHAs. It was smarter than the humans. Yeah, it was smarter than the humans that made it. Within a month. Like, they didn't think that it would actually go through that logic of going and finding someone on Fiverr to go and click a CAPTCHA button. So
wow.
It's terrifying what it'll do, but I'm also really excited to see what it'll do too. But
I was recently listening to something that said we're kind of like at an elbow point in history right now, where it's the first time in human existence that we can't look out 50 years and relatively guess what it'll look like. So you're right, terrifying, but also super exciting. And we're going to get to live through it.
Oh, yeah.
All the meal planning to come.
Yeah, and save like half an hour in your shop with meal planning thanks to ChatGPT. But anyway, Tanessa, it's been fantastic having you on board. I have been glued to my screen listening to what you had to say about this cycle planning, which I have kind of already done. And I have to say, I find myself to be a lot more productive and much more compassionate with myself as well. And just going, you need to take a break. Your hormones are out of whack. Just chill. And then,
right?
Yeah.
And it's also going to be helpful when my girls are teenagers, because I'll know.
Oh my gosh.
Crystal and I have boys, so they have no idea what they're getting into.
Too good.
Anyway, thank you so much, Tanessa.
Thanks, Tanessa, and congratulations on podcast number 106.
Oh, thank you.
Take care.
Bye.